Welcome to Internet Network Expert CCIE class on demand. In this session, we're going to take a look at running Dynamips on our PC in order to emulate Cisco router hardware and run virtual iOS processes on our local desktops. Now, what Dynamips is an iOS virtualization program that is similar to how VMware or Parallels work on desktops in order to simulate different hardware platforms. Now, Dynamips is different than a traditional router simulator because we are not actually trying to emulate the iOS. What we're going to do is take actual Cisco iOS images, emulate the router hardware on our PCs, boot the iOS images into different logical router processes, and then they're going to be able to talk to each other with whatever protocols are available in that particular iOS image. Now, within the scope of the CCIE preparation, this is going to be a very useful program in order to test out different practice lab exams without having to buy equipment or to rent equipment over the internet. Now, in order to run Dynamips, the first thing we need is a PC, and there is going to be support for Dynamips on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. So in order to run the Dynamips process, there's going to be two different programs that we need. There's going to be the Dynamips hypervisor that is actually used to emulate the router's hardware. Then we have another recommended piece of software that is called DynaGen, which is used to create an INI-like configuration file in order to ease in the configuration and booting of the hypervisor process. Now, what we're going to see, we're going to go through an install of the Dynamips and DynaGen process. We'll go ahead and download some iOS images and boot up some routers and test them out. And what we'll see is that with the DynaGen package, when we download this, it does include the latest release of Dynamips, and it has a installer that is basically going to take care of everything for us. So we're going to need our PC, the Dynamips program, actual iOS images that we're going to download from Cisco's software site, and then any terminal emulation program like Command Line Telnet or Hyperterminal or Secure CRT. Now, if we take a look at the InternetWorkExpert.com website here, there's a page that we have set up that gives you basically a step-by-step process of all the installation procedures that are needed in order to run Dynamips. Now, in this case, we have a Windows PC that we're taking a look at here. So the first thing that we need to do in order to run Dynamips is to install the WinPCAP software in order to support the network interface cards to talk to the Dynamips process. So from the WinPCAP website here, we'll go down to Get WinPCAP. And for Windows, we have this auto installer. We'll go ahead and run this program. So our next step here, once we have WinPCAP installed, we're going to download the DynaGen process that is going to include the Dynamips hypervisor. So if we take a look back at this page under Resources, we have a link to DynaGen here. And we can see from this page, it says also that you need WinPCAP version 4.0. We can see that's already been downloaded there. So we'll go ahead and download the DynaGen process for Windows XP. And once this is complete, we'll go ahead and install the DynaGen process. And we can see that this does include Dynamips. It says this is version 027 release candidate 1. Now, once we install this, if we want to go ahead and update Dynamips later for new features that are added, the only thing that we need to do is download the new Dynamips hypervisor. You don't necessarily need to update DynaGen. So if we take a look at the desktop here, what is going to happen once this program is installed is that we have a link to the Dynamips server, and this is going to be used to launch the hypervisor process. Now, once we have this launched, then we're going to initiate a .NET file that is going to be used to configure what individual router instances we're going to run, what interfaces they have, and what iOS images that they are going to be running. Now, if you take a look in the sample lab folder, you will see some templates that you can go ahead and change around in order to create different router topologies. But if we take a look back at the Internet Network Expert website, there is a template that we put together here to support the IEWB-RS version 4, the CCIE Routing and Switching Lab Workbook version 4, as well as the Service Provider Lab Workbook. So if we go ahead and open this archive here, now when you go ahead and extract this archive, what you need to be sure of is that if we look under, this is going to be the default folder that it was installed in. It's going to be under Program Files and then Dynamips. And we have a dynamips-start.command file. When we extract this, you need to make sure to overwrite the local copy that you have installed that came with the Dynaterm process. You want to make sure to overwrite it with this one because there's some extra configuration lines in here that are going to allow us to boot multiple Dynamips processes at the same time. So let's go ahead and extract this just to C:. And we can see that it's asking us, do we want to overwrite that file? And yes, we do. Okay, so at this point we have the Dynamips process installed. We have our configuration files. Now we need to make sure that we have actual iOS images that are going to be booted by the Dynamips process. Now if we take a look here under Sample Labs, you should see a new folder that was created for Internet Network Expert. And in this case, we're going to boot the routing and switching topology for the version 4.0 product. So this would be the Routing and Switching Lab Workbook version 4, as well as the Core Lab Workbook version 4. Okay, the Advanced Technologies class and the Advanced Technologies class on demand, they would also use this topology. Now, if we go ahead and take a look at this, let's open this with Notepad. And inside this .NET file, this is where the configuration of the router processes are going to be, as well as the iOS versions that we're going to be using. Now, there's a number of different platforms that you can emulate. In this particular configuration, we are using 3640s, but with the newer versions, you can do 2600s and you can also do 3600s. Now, the resulting configuration is really not going to be that much different between the 26, 36, and 3700. So you can go ahead and modify it if you want to, but if you use the base configuration here, it should work fine. Okay, now what we do need to know out of this configuration file is what is the specific iOS image that we are trying to boot. And in this case, it is a 3640 Enterprise Plus image. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and copy this. And we're going to go to Cisco's website. So from Cisco's website, assuming that you have a valid support contract, we're going to go ahead and log in, then go down to Software Downloads. And what we can see here from the Software Downloads page, we'll just go ahead and paste this image name in, minus the extracted. And we're looking for this specific image for the 3640 that we want to go ahead and download. So we can see the image here is 3640 Enterprise Firewall IDS Plus IPsec Triple DES. Now, depending on the amount of resources that you have on your PC that is running the Dynamips process, you may want to run a smaller image than this to take up less resources. Now, typically what I find, if you have somewhere around 2 gigs of RAM and you can dedicate at least 1 full gigabyte towards the Dynamips process, you should be able to go ahead and boot all of the devices that are going to be necessary for the routing and switching topology. Now, if you're only dealing with 1 or 2 routers, or just a handful of them, it's not really that resource intensive, but for as the numbers increase with the number of devices you're booting, it is going to be taking a lot of memory from the PC. So let's go ahead and get this image here. Okay, now once we have the iOS image downloaded, the next thing that we want to do is expand the image. We want to extract it with some type of archiving program like WinRAR or gzip. Okay, now if we take a look back at the .NET file for the topology, we can see the file name says that it's this image, but it is the extracted version of it. Now, when we go ahead and extract it, this is not the file name that is going to be inside the archive, so we're going to rename our resulting file towards this file name. Now, you don't necessarily need to do this process with going ahead and extracting the file, but what you'll find is that when you go to boot the router images, it's going to be a lot faster in the booting process if you pre-extract the files and you don't let the Dynamics process have to worry about the extraction. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the desktop here, and we should see this iOS image here. So we'll go ahead and open this with WinRAR. So we see this is the extracted file inside, or the compressed file inside. So we'll go ahead and extract this just to the desktop. And once we have that, we'll go ahead and rename it to the name that was in the .NET file. And if we take a look back at the configuration here, this file, it's looking for it under C:/program files dynamips/images. So this is where we want to put the image. Now, if we were running this on Linux or Mac OS, then you would go ahead and modify this file accordingly. But for the base configuration, the only thing that we really need out of this .NET file is just to know what the iOS image is and where the location is supposed to be. So let's go ahead and move this image. It's going to be under Program Files, Dynamips, and then Images. And we can see the image was previously there from another install, so we'll go ahead and overwrite it again. Now, once we have the iOS image in that directory, we can go ahead and start the Dynamips process. So let me close all these other windows. So we'll start the Dynamips server. And what we should see is that two instances appear down here. One of them is going to be listening at port 7200. The other one is going to be listening at port 7201. Okay, the reason why we have two processes running is that we want to make sure that we don't run into Windows memory limitation for an individual process. So due to the number of routers that we're going to be booting, we're going to distribute the processes between these two different Dynamips instances we have running. Okay, so once we have the Dynamips server running, we're going to go ahead and go under Sample Labs, then Internet Network Expert, and we'll go ahead and double-click on the routing and switching topology. Okay, so we can see now the Dynagen program comes up. This is going to be our interface in order to access the routers that are running in the Dynamips process. Okay, so once this starts, if we go ahead and type list here, we can see that we have routers 1 through 6, switch 1, switch 2, switch 3, and switch 4, the 3 backbone routers, the frame relay switch, and then the terminal server. Okay, now with the default configuration in that .NET file, these routers are not going to be booted by default. So the state of these is all going to be stopped. Now you can go ahead and modify the .NET file if you change the auto start equals false option to auto start equals true, then it would go ahead and boot those images automatically. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do here from the Dynagen command line is go ahead and start some of these router processes. So we'll say start R1, and you'll see that this is case sensitive, so we'll start R1 and R2. And if we take a look at the hypervisor, we should see that the router processes are starting here. So we should get some output in this window. Now if we take a look at the list output again, we can see that R1 and R2 are now running, and they are listening at ports 2001. So if we go ahead and say here we want to telnet over to R1, this is going to invoke just the default Windows telnet application over to R1, and we'll telnet to R2 as well. So from here we can see that we're at the iOS command line now, and if we look at the show version output, We can see it says this is a 3640 that has a fast Ethernet interface and 4 serial interfaces. So if we look at the show IP interface and brief output, we can see it looks like just a regular iOS process running. Okay, so if we go here, let's go to the serial interfaces and we'll configure IP. We'll say router 2 here is going to be 10.0.0.2/24. And this is going to be a frame relay link, so we'll say encapsulation frame relay. And to get over to router 1, we're going to say frame relay map IP. To get to 10.0.0.1, we're going to use circuit 201. We'll go ahead and bring that interface up. Then on router 1, we'll go ahead and configure it on the way back. So we here are going to be 10.0.0.1/24. Encapsulation frame relay map IP. To get to 10.0.0.2, we're going to use circuit 102. Now you will see some minor inconsistencies with the Dynamips process as opposed to real iOS. So for example, here on router 2, if we look at the show frame relay PVC output, and let's include just the PVC status. We could see that all of these PVCs, actually let's say include DLCI. Okay, only one of these PVCs is locally configured, 201, which we configured on the interface. Even though the other circuits are not actually used, the PVC status is going to be showing active. So the frame relay switch that's built into the Dynamips process, it does not support end-to-end LMI to actually indicate what the circuit status is. But that type of low-level stuff we really don't need to worry about. As long as we have basic functionality of the iOS, we're good to go. So here on router 2, if we go ahead and ping 10.0.0.1, we can see we have connectivity over to router 1. And just to double check that, let's go ahead and say enable password Cisco, and under line VTY04, no login. So from router 2, if we telnet to 10.0.0.1, we can see now we're connected to router 1. So from the Dynagen process here, we can go ahead and say that we want to start all of the processes. You go ahead and look at the question mark. You can see that there is some context-sensitive help there. Now you can also modify this so that the telnet command will go ahead and reference a different terminal emulation program. So if you want to use Hyperterminal or Secure CRT or PuTTY, you can go ahead and modify those in order to launch it through there. Otherwise, if you were to open up Secure CRT, you could go ahead and telnet to your local IP address and just connect it to whatever port that we have configured here. Now, one of the additional processes we also see here is a terminal server. And the way this is configured, let's go ahead and take a look at the .NET file. Let's go ahead and open this back up with Notepad. And if we go all the way down to the bottom for the terminal server instance, the way this is set up here is that the Ethernet 0/0 interface of the terminal server process is connected to a loopback that we can go ahead and configure locally on your PC. So in Windows here, if you take a look at this support document under the Microsoft Knowledge Base, it shows you how to install a Microsoft loopback adapter. Once you do that, what you want to do is from the desktop, go ahead and open up the network device list. So this link here, network device list. And what it is going to show is the hardware address of what your loopback adapter is. Now, in this case, we don't have the loopback configured. We have just a regular network adapter, then we have a VPN adapter. We could see this NPF address. This is the address that we would want to find out of the loopback. So if you configure the loopback, restart the computer, then go ahead and run this process. We want this NPF number. If you go ahead and paste this into the .NET file and take out the pound signs, because that's going to comment it out. So take that pound out. what you'll be able to do is open up a connection just to the terminal server instance, and from the terminal server you can go ahead and reverse telnet to the other lines. So if we look back at the Dynagen process, we could go ahead and say we want to start the terminal server instance. And if we telnet to the terminal server, from here, we'll see once this boots up here. From here we have the host mapping set up where we could go ahead and just say that we want to connect to R1 or R2, R3, etc. Okay, so the way this is bound is that it is assuming that your loopback adapter would have an IP address of 169.254.0.1. So you're basically telnetting from this logical instance to your local PC at these port numbers to connect to the other processes. Now, if you do have any trouble running the Dynamips process from your initial installation, what I would recommend to do, if you take a look at the resource page here, all the way at the bottom, there's a link to the actual Dynamips page where you can download the new versions and look at the technical blog. But there's also a support forum here that is used for asking questions to the developers of the program. So if you have trouble, take a look at that. Look at the frequently asked questions. And from the basic configuration that we have here with the InternetworkExpert.net file, really the only thing that you need to do in order to get this working is that when you extract the archive, make sure that you overwrite the Dynamips start command, because this is going to have it listen at port 7200 and 7201. So two different instances it's going to have you boot. From there, make sure that you have the iOS image in the right location and that you have the right file name there. So if you want to go ahead and use a different image, the only thing you need to do is go ahead and change the image name here. And like I said, it is recommended to go ahead and extract the image first with something like gzip or WinRAR, because that's going to cut down the loading time into the Dynamips process. So this concludes our class on demand on using Dynamips for CCIE lab preparation. Good luck in your road to the CCIE certification.